Welcome everybody to another edition of my podcast, and today we are taking not a different tack, just an interesting route, because I have been in the brigade historically that has said it's dead. So I'm delighted to welcome Gerry Hill from Connect and Sell, who describes himself as a recovering CRO, unapologetic salesperson, passionate about your early pipeline, and a few other things. Gerry and I's path crossed in the sales borgs, and it's been fascinating looking at those conversations that have unfurled there. And then I've actually been, well, they didn't really get very far, but hosted, no, chaired, I don't know, cold calling conversation, a cold calling competition. So I will shut up. Gerry, who, what, why, when, where, what's your background, what's Connect all and Sell all about, and let's get into this.
Background a bit like you, Alexander, ex-blue suit wearing, red tie, red brace wearing recruiter into finance and accountancy, competing shots for Health versus Michael Page. Then made the sort of typical transition smart recruiters seem to make, which is out of recruitment and into differentiated, value-added B2B companies, software services, professional services, management consulting. Failed CRO, successful CRO in hyper growth and early stage companies, ran a turnaround business for a while, and realized I wasn't a particularly good, gifted managing director of my own destiny, and now work inside a Connect and Sell, which was for me a transformational weapon for the companies I built and the teams that I led. So Connect and Sell, we solve for the number one frustration for salespeople today, which is reducing time spent navigating phone directories, switchboards, speaking to gatekeepers and admins, and delivering, like Uber, on-demand conversations with named prospects that you want to speak to in your market.
Awesome. So you were a Connect and Sell customer before you then went to work with Connect and Sell?
Absolutely. 3.5 years, man and boy.
Perfect.
In the system.
So let's call it how it is. Gerry Hill, is cold calling dead?
In much the same way as email's dead, as social's dead, as gifting's dead, as writing letters are dead. Everything's dead. Everything's dead. Everything's dead.
If everything's dead, how do we start conversations with people?
Exactly. No, I mean, it depends on your moral compass and what you feel works for you. The big issue is feeling over fact is often the one thing that seems to govern a lot of leaders today. And a lot of leaders seem to be governed by what their people tell them. Companies make these big assumptions and even bigger bets on channel of choice. But unless you do something really well and you make it relevant, everything's dead. And I think we work in an automation world now, which is asking people to almost be a bit lazy and not think and not deliver value in conversations, or deliver value in email, or deliver value in LinkedIn, or deliver value in X, Y, Z. So the debate then rages. I had success in email, so the only thing that can work for me today is email. Cold calling must be dead because I've had some success in the channel. But did you try the other thing for long enough to get any evidence that it's dead, or do you just operate off an instinct? And I think that that's the big sort of collision point that we see in the selling industry today, the selling of sales industry, is just this very myopic, one-eyed view on the thing that works for me, not actually taking into consideration the other stuff. So you get camps and polarization as a result, when actually, if you just do a lot of something really well using every channel, you can measure it, have some success across all of it, and then figure out what your strategy needs to be. People just aren't investing time and effort into that part of the process.
I think that's a really interesting, a lovely. And you do have a very lovely turn of phrase. I love the narrative we see on the board chat. It's feeling over fact, and why do we? If I try to unpack that in my head, why do we think that is? Is that because we have the big brands out there, pumping the research papers down our throats, in terms of my technology can change the way that you do things? Is it because we have experts out there, and I fall in that camp in terms of what I what I talk about and what I see around what works and what doesn't work? Is it an age thing? Because if I go back to yes, wearing the red braces and the flappy shoes and the highlights of my Michael Page days, when it was literally the only way that you could make a conversation. And it was pretty simple. The more calls you make, the more people you're going to connect with. The more people you connect with, the more likely you'll have a conversation. The more likely you have a conversation, the more likely you've got something to sell. And that still remains true today. I guess, is it part of this X factor kind of fame in 15 minutes type sort of thing? I want it now, and if I can't get it now, I'm going to try something different, or it doesn't work. Do you think?
I mean, there's automation for everything, right? But there are certain automations which automate things that aren't actually difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people are going to take the path of least resistance and automate the thing that they don't find is difficult. But the big problem with that is it creates a psychological disconnect between this idea that I do something once and have technology deliver it for me,
Yeah.
versus me doing it a lot of times. And there's cognitive dissonance. If I send 500 automated LinkedIn messages or 500 automated emails, I'm probably counting that as 500 things that I did. No, I did it once,
Yeah.
and I had somebody else or something else do it 500 times for me. And it's a bit like the Old Spice ad, where the guy's running down the beach and he's suddenly on a horse, and everything just seemed so easy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the engagement platforms and the automation tools and everything else that you can buy today in selling ultimately are failing to deliver on, but are promising. I think with calling, it's still hard. You can automate as much of it as you want, but unless you've got a desire to have conversations with people,
Yeah.
then you're not going to be very good at it. And I say that as somebody that sells millions of dials and hundreds of thousands of conversations to my market every single year. But sometimes people just don't like it because they don't enjoy the process of speaking to complete strangers. And that's why cold calling is always going to be such a contentious topic for so many people.
Yeah.
That feeling that it gives them. And it's probably an issue that's wrong with selling today. You still need to hold a perspective, a position. You've still got a right to sell. You've still got a right to try and influence and persuade. But I think we've moved so far down the personalization engagement narrative that people have forgotten that. And then it all becomes about the buyer, the buyer, the buyer. Sometimes the buyer doesn't know what's good for them.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the mindset to reach out and tell them what's good for them, then you're going to hate cold calling. If you're still having to go in and invade somebody's time, space, and day in a very visceral way. You're doing it in email, by the way.
Yeah.
You can't get immediate feedback. You can't hang up on me in an email. You can't tell me that I'm a bottom feeder in an email. You can't tell me that there should be more honorable ways to make a living in an email. That takes real concerted effort. Whereas in an ambush phone call, it takes zero effort. So if I'm a modern rep who's probably been told that my feelings matter, then yeah, it's going to be a bruising experience.
It's an interesting one. If I look back again to my page days, and the personalization back in the day didn't exist because it was only relevance. How did I know that this sales director or HR director probably had a problem? Because I could see they were hiring a job. I'm like, you're advertising a job there. So I've got somebody that I think might help. So it wasn't personalised; it was just relevant to that situation because I can see that you have a need, and I think I've got the solution to that need. And they didn't really care in terms of I saw that you're connected to this, or I've seen that you've done that. Now I recognise that in some instances that plays a part. But what is it that then? Is it that the cold calling isn't dead? It's just fundamentally, to your point, the aspect of making a cold call. Some people can do, and some people can't. End of.
Yeah, but I also think it's like anything in life. You sort of fail to prepare, you prepare to fail, right? So, great calls, great conversations need to have structures. They need to be scripted. They need to have a methodology applied. They need to have coaching and tonality and a whole bunch of other things to manufacture them to work. But we don't expect that of people anymore. So most people are going to pick up the phone and not know what to say. That's the first thing that cripples most people. Now, if you don't know what to say and I get you on the end of the phone, we're going to have a very uncomfortable 20 minutes together. If I can create a conversation that lasts that long, which I can't. And then there's a massive delta, which I can show you a methodology which will work for you. I can show you a structure which has been proven to work time and time again because we get 89% conversation acceptance. We get 12% conversion from this structure. Will you use it? No. Why? Well, it doesn't feel natural to me. Well, the whole act of calling a stranger and speaking to a stranger feels unnatural. Why do you need to make it any more natural? And you end up in this sort of pull-push tension constantly about actually trying to get people to execute really well. But here's the thing, most people don't seem to realize what it can do for them. All right, some truth bombs. People measure trust in bits of information.
Yeah.
The human voice carries tens of thousands of bits of information. An email carries 5,000 bits of information. For me to manufacture the same amount of trust in an email exchange, I need to send about 200 emails versus the 1 minute conversation I can have with you today. But we want to bury ourselves behind it. Email's open to misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Voice isn't. We see the conversion data. You know, a high-performing script can convert to meeting far in excess of some of the most high-performing email sequences you're ever going to see. Everybody complains about LinkedIn automation today. You know, the invite and pitch conundrum. So, you know, find a mechanism which works, but most people are too lazy, and it comes back down to professionalization of sales and tribes and quick wins and hacks. I don't know anybody in their career, regardless of which camp, channel, methodology you stand in, who's ever found a quick win. It's an impossible task.
It's and that's the thing. You know, if I'd have found it, then you know I wouldn't be sitting here today in terms of having this conversation with you, because we'd be a very rich person, because you'd have found that silver bullet. And as we all know, sales is bloody hard work. It is not an easy task in any shape or form. So I think that's interesting, you know, and again, I love listening to you and talking to you. You always make me think around things a different way, and around, you know, voice in terms of how voice can build trust. And look at what's happening with Clubhouse right now. Fireside's coming out, and whatever the Twitter one that's coming out, and where that's going to play in this space, I'm still to be convinced. And yes, you can convey tone and voice in the written word, but very few people actually have that skill to be able to do that in a way that you can do that still feels human. So, and you know, looking again, I remember you, and this is the interesting thing about kind of research, but it was that McKinsey piece that you shared, which kind of caught my attention, is that they looked at 40,000 deals, and it was 82% of those high performers said the old-fashioned telephone call was more superior at getting someone's attention. Now that was US weighted data. You know, the European data was slightly lower, but it's interesting out there that out of 40,000 deals that's a decent number statistically, empirically, to go, if 82% of those deals were initiated by a cold call, something's working, right?
Yeah, I think it's about what's the objective though. A lot of people are so short-minded about the runway to success on an outbound program, regardless of your channel. Good friend of mine, Sean Cease, put it really eloquently to me the other day, and I think he published this on LinkedIn. If somebody doesn't give me a runway of 18 to 36 months to execute this strategy, I don't want to participate in the strategy. Okay. If we look at B2B services more broadly, right? Chet Holmes, the economist, writes really well on this. You've got a buyer's pyramid. In B2B, the displacement cycle is normally about 3 years for a service or a product. For innovation, it's probably even less, right? You've got 3% that are in market any quarter that are looking to buy something proactively that looks like something you or I could do for them.
Yep.
That's very, very, very short odds. Take into account the entire competitive landscape, some of whom might have engaged significantly earlier than you. The opportunity to actually win that 3% is minimal. Yep. You then layer in your own win rate in your own sales process, 15% of 3% suddenly becomes even less. What's the actual goal of outbound? It's to book meetings with people that are inherently curious.
Yeah.
Now, that then takes us into a sorting mechanism. If I think about it in Harry Potter context, cold call is the ultimate sorting hat for your market.
Yep.
Because you're going to get immediate visceral outcomes. You're going to get a no, not now. I'm not ready, but give me a call back in 3 months. No, not me. I'm not the right person in my organization, but Sue sits 2 jobs above me. She'll find this really relevant. And yes, you can tell her that I told you to call her.
Yep.
Right. No, not never. They're going to be in that 30% of the market that will never buy anything because they just aren't geared for it. Autumn, disqualify out hard. No, not you. I've heard bad things about you and the company. Reputationally, I'm not going to work with you because I'm happy with my existing vendor.
Yeah.
That's a no, not you. And then lastly, yes, I'll take the meeting. I've never seen, and I used to be a bit of an email junkie. I've never seen email execute that level of sorting on my market for me.
Yeah.
Because it takes physical energy for a prospect to email me back. Whereas in a 27-second or a minute conversation or a 2-minute 38 conversation, I can acquire that information and turn it back into something useful for my business, either in terms of marketing, nurture, follow-up, referral, or the meeting. But only if I could have a lot of those, please.
Yeah.
That's the real friction and why most people hate cold calling, because they hate being sat there strapped to a phone doing this 15 times an hour. One conversation every 90 minutes, 4 conversations a week. We're asking super skilled salespeople to become $5 an hour phone operators.
Yeah.
What's easy? Go and send an email. What's easy? Go and put something on LinkedIn and count the likes. But none of that stuff's about action. So that's where the tension exists, my opinion.
I think that it's. I agree with you, and I believe social. I actually, and anybody that follows me knows that I hate the term social selling. I just think it's just selling for the 21st century, and social is a part of that channel in terms of your prospecting routes to potentially start a conversation with, as is email, as is picking up the phone, as is carrier pigeon. I don't really care what works, and it always comes back to challenging clients. What are you actually trying to do here? What's the intended outcome here? What's the actual end goal in terms of what you're trying to achieve? I'm amazed the amount of organisers don't really understand that themselves. It's like, well, this and that. Well, okay, well, if you can't even understand where you're trying to get to, then we can't really just start a conversation of whether this is even the right thing for you. Now, of course, we find ourselves in an interesting world currently in terms of the world of virtual, and you're seeing kind of again all the research papers coming out going digital, this and that. But at the end of the day, it's a human conversation. Is a human conversation, and without that, you're never going to be able to move forwards. Yes, I'm seeing again McKinsey saying that. Organisations, based on research they did over the summer, I'm guessing around the same time that the piece of research that you put up, that some buyers are now prepared to spend upwards of $1 million contract value in a completely end-to-end virtual cycle. It's like, okay, that then presents an interesting conundrum in my view for the salesperson of tomorrow, if you will. Where do you? And I know there is no kind of answer to this, but based on obviously what Connect and Sell are doing, which is you enable calls to happen at scale, so you are getting those connect rates much higher rather than somebody being sat there and kind of strapped to the phone. But what's Connect and where do we think this may go in the next 5 years or so around this in terms of calls, Zooms, social, Clubhouse? I don't know. Or this always.
I think there's probably a master convergence play, right? And at the macro of the industry, within the next 18 months, we're going to start seeing a massive consolidation boom and an M&A boom being driven by 2 very distinct camps.
Yeah.
The Microsoft camp. There's going to be a Salesforce camp. And there might be a third challenger somewhere out there. Maybe it'll be an independent alliance of some sort. But you can imagine this hierarchy. Salesforce are going to buy Outreach.
Yeah.
Outreach are going to buy a data provider like Cognizant. They're then going to buy a parallel dialer. They're then going to buy a time trade or a Calendly or something.
Yeah.
And they'll then try to find an integrated cross-sell proposition to enhance corporate value whilst consolidating the entire stack. Then down the Microsoft stack, you can already see it playing out, okay? LinkedIn, strategic investor in SalesLoft.
Yeah.
Microsoft acquires LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Probably see the first data seeded CRM starting to come to market in the next 2 to 3 years. So you start to see this consolidation happening down these lines. What's the big issue with that? You've got companies like ZoomInfo who've taken on billions of dollars of debt in order to fund an IPO without any real inherent corporate value attached to the due diligence. You've got the sales engagement platforms raising mega rounds and becoming billion-dollar companies with owner dilution of equity being so significant that they're just debt vehicles. And then you've got ultimately cheap valuation as a result, which is going to make these acquisitions really easy to achieve, because where the founders and the operators and the VCs then got to turn. So it's actually going to cheapen the sales stack, which is sad because it's the great force multiplier for business if they know how to consider it and consolidate it and use that capability really well. But we're 10 years behind MarTech, and in the UK, we're 4 to 5 years on adoption behind the US. So it's a fascinating paradigm that we're all experiencing at the moment. What's the number one goal? I still don't see it from the majority of chief revenue officers I speak to, because they don't think about things from a cost and science point of view, Alex.
Yeah.
I have a necessary cost in my business, which is I have salespeople that are costing me $400 a day. They're going to do the things that they're going to do. But if I can reduce that necessary cost from $10 a unit of activity to $1.50 a unit of activity, I still think the investment required to make that happen seems expensive. Whereas if I speak to a CMO, they're happy to consolidate that necessary cost of doing business at $10 a unit and try and collapse it to $1.50, because they're striving for revenue attribution. So you've got two slices of technology spend that do converge around the same goal, being bought by two different groups of people with two very different line items of budget attached. The CMO has more, the VP of sales, or the CRO has a lot less. And marketing still hasn't cracked attribution yet. So why do they get more money? It's nuts. Like, the whole thing is so perverse. And I work deeply in the industry, and I get to say that because I sit there tearing my last remaining hair out every day, because the lack of logic just smacks me in the face hard.
Yeah, it's the attribution piece. You're so right. I just sit there when people. I've had, the sales enablement person, large tech company, shall remain nameless, which kind of challenged me around social selling and sales navigator, and kind of proved to me this works. And I just said to him, well, prove to me cold calling works, prove to me email marketing works, prove to me any of it works. He goes, what do you mean? I said, if you're not attributing sales conversations and meetings in a CRM system, you can't prove any of it. And he kind of sat there and went a bit quiet and went, never really thought about it from that point of view. And I'm thinking, how much money are you spending on stuff? And you don't even know that it's working. To your point around the consolidation piece, so the interesting conversation with Seth Mards from Forrester around their take on guided selling, which is exactly kind of what you talked about. It's this consolidation of the sales and marketing stack, AI, technology, bringing this all together to the point that you will have the data points, you'll know where the 3% is, you'll know where they are in the buying, in theory, where they are in the buying cycle, you'll know who to talk to, when to talk to them about what. But my sense is that we're just not, as a community, we're just not ready for it, because it's going to be so far ahead of us that we're struggling to, how do I work Zoom? How do I work OneNote on Microsoft? Let alone, having awesome tech that you have. Then you layer that with someone else, and then it's like, well, if you're a CRO, maybe we'll be sitting there going, why do I even need an SDR? Why do I even need this person if it's going to be that automated? But does this then fit in with what the buyer actually wants? And I do agree with you. Sometimes the buyer doesn't know what they want, but one has to also kind of understand that there is an expectation between them and us around what they want that journey to be, if you will.
But the only way asynchronous or guided selling works is if you've got a complete colouring book filled in between the lines of every single part of the customer journey. And my fear is, at the moment, the AI products are only taking into account the email and the actual buying process once somebody's engaged. Jiminy, Gong, Chorus, Refract, Exec Vision, they can all capture the intelligence from the downstream discovery to close part of the sales process. And Salesloft, Salesforce, Outreach, Microsoft Dynamics, they can capture the record taking and email engagement part of the process. And then the rest of it's completely blind. And we're asking for salespeople to self-report on that activity, and salespeople inherently lie about what they do every day. I was very good at my job in recruitment, but I had a dickhead manager who just loved the KPI story.
Yeah.
Didn't matter how well I was doing, how margin intense my temp book was, none of it.
Yeah.
So I spent Friday afternoons dialing the talking clock. For those of you old enough to remember.
We all did, right?
My mum, my dad, my mates to make plans for that weekend.
Yeah.
They were logged as activities.
Yeah. CV's out Friday afternoon. Quick, who can I send a CV to get the stats up?
No, and so you just and to the point, we even had managers that were bringing people back in the weekend to backfill on KPIs and CV sends and stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Even though they were doing well, even though they were hitting numbers. So thank God we're moving along from that.
Yeah.
But I think the key point is that there are just these huge blind spots in the customer narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation is still a significant part of originating pipeline and opportunity, and nobody's willing to have a conversation about how to uncover that blind spot. And it's because the best marketing budgets are winning the war for minds right now.
Yeah.
And winning the war for minds in an interesting place, not the place that you or I would necessarily have expected, and that's RevOps.
Yeah. Well, it's just, and again, RevOps is an interesting one in terms of, for me, it's just sales enablement 2.0, or it's just the next iteration of what they should be. Back to my point around social selling, digital selling, modern selling, virtual selling, guided selling. It's just selling, right? At the end of the day, it's just sales.
It's just selling. Yeah. It was quite funny after you pushed the Forrester interview the other day. I read it and I thought it was really good, actually, and I like their perspective. But then it got me thinking. I went up into my back garden and I was taking a few swings with the golf club just to burn some energy. And I was like, Christ, we haven't even cracked sales 1.0. We haven't even cracked ABM. We haven't even cracked ABS. And now we're jumping out to guided or asynchronous selling. Literally 1.1% of sales leaders in the world would have the capability to implement that next step change. There's still 95% of the market that hasn't even got to grips with a rationalized step-by-step process that they've got documented and written down. So why do we keep jumping so far ahead of ourselves?
I agree. And I remember when Outreach got the valuation during the height of that, the height of the pandemic in the summer, it's like north of $1 billion. I was like, what? People somewhere are either telling a really good story, or they think that this is the future of where it's all going to go. So either it's going to go, or it's going to go pop, and then people are going to have some egg on their faces. But the Salesforces and the Microsofts were never going to let that happen, because they can just swallow the risk. I mean, everyone raised an eyebrow when Microsoft bought LinkedIn for $26 billion, and I think it was worth like 3 on paper or something to that.
It's about where you strategically place the premium, and so much of this is driven by the MBAs and gilets rather than the actual operators.
That's not a gilet you're wearing, though, is it?
I'm a keen wearer of a gilet, but I wear 100 gilets, and not Patagonia. So I think the key point there is, though, that it's really easy to model potential in the spreadsheet, but unless you actually understand the situation on the ground of what the actual total addressable market of your sales technology is, for me, the sales engagement platforms can only ever grow within the high growth company community, which is technology companies.
Yeah.
One of my benefits of speaking to so many people at Connect and Sell is actually we've got broad utility across most B2B segments, industrial, capital goods, any of it.
Yeah.
If I'm strategizing at Outreach, my big conversation piece in the boardroom, if I was Manny Medina, would be sitting there going, how do we create an inside sales and SDR culture for the big manufacturing companies?
Yeah.
Because they now have to create that to go and take that next market.
Yeah.
Whereas for something like Connect and Sell, we just say, do you put a premium on having conversations with people in your market? Do you want to make that more efficient, cheaper, and easier? We don't have to create a category because it can apply to any salesperson in that organization.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where these big valuations are painting themselves into a corner, is they now need to go and create new categories in markets that would never, ever consider using email as a channel.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I hadn't considered it from that point of view. And I'm learning all the way, listening to you and listening to obviously everyone in the sales boards kind of talk, and it does comes full circle back to this tribalism that seems to be appearing bizarrely on social media, where people are saying this doesn't work, but I'm going to talk about it on the platform that I say doesn't work, which then is like
I am eternally grateful to LinkedIn because it does two things for me. It allows me to have a voice. I'll never say social selling doesn't work, because it does. I can attribute 18 to 19% of my pipeline last year directly from LinkedIn posts that I made.
That's awesome.
But none from prospecting.
Yeah.
So I didn't do any social prospecting. I'd never used a message to go out and introduce myself to somebody at all, unless I'd spoken to them and using Connect and Sell first.
Yeah.
But just those little snippets of insight around my activity or conversations that I had or thoughts, 19% of my number last year came from people going, I'm curious about this, Gerry. Can you tell me more about how you did it?
Yeah.
And so that's awesome. That's 20% of my funnel. Another 15 to 20% on inbounds. That then leaves me 60% on outbound.
Yeah. And this comes full circle back to the point around it's every channel, right? It's not you can't just put all your eggs into one basket because it's just not going to work. So it's been an absolute joy talking to you. I could talk about this for forever. If you want to find out more about what Connect and Sell does, then absolutely please do, because I've seen the tool in action. There are YouTube videos which I will attach to this. But where can people find you, Gerry, to learn more about what you can bring to them and how what you do can help drive pipeline?
So my UK number is 07702 034 081. I'm a willing acceptee of cold calls from people. So please feel free to call me. Email address is gerry.hill@connectandsell.com, all one word, and then LinkedIn, Gerry Hill.
Perfect.
And Clubhouse, but I don't know what my handle is for that. So you might find me in Clubhouse, which I'm now starting to toy with a bit more.
Yeah, let's not get started on Clubhouse. I look at some of that. I just wonder how people are actually doing anything other than spending time on Clubhouse.
I find it's really good just to listen in when I'm changing baby nappies and baby. Otherwise, I just treat it like a podcast almost.
No, it is. I've done that once, and then I was invited to stage without realising I'd been invited to stage. People expect, oh, shit. You want me to actually say something? Awesome, Gerry. So, in short, cold calling isn't dead. To your point, everything's dead if you can't prove it works and you can't attribute what you're trying to achieve, I guess.
Yep.
Awesome. As ever, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to be on this podcast, you know what to do. Just send me a message, connect with me. Please do follow up and connect with Gerry. I'll be intrigued to find out if anybody has cold called him off the back of this. But from Gerry, awesome. Thank you. I'll see you in WhatsApp. And for everybody else, I'll see you next week on the next episode of this podcast. Thank you.